how you can use your emotional triggers as portals for immense growth and healing. Have you ever noticed the things that make you cringe, shut down, and spiral? They're not actually your enemy. They are, in fact, opportunities for immense growth and healing. When we feel emotionally triggered by something, that's actually a part of us that's letting us know that an old wound has gotten pinged. So when we feel reactive in various situations, or when we have a larger response in the moment that the situation may call for, it is a great opportunity for us to pause and recognize that there is something within us that is coming up to be witnessed, to be felt, and to be released. So many of us, the moment a difficult emotion comes up, we immediately pull back and we want to cope in various ways because it's so uncomfortable to be in those emotions, especially those emotions that feel familiar or resonant from our childhood. Because many of the feelings that we're feeling are not the good feelings. That's not always true because sometimes as children, we also stuff down our joy and our passion and those kind of feelings. But for many of us, it's the difficult feelings of shame, guilt, sadness, anger, the emotions that we are so desperate to avoid and that we do our very best to keep locked away within us because we're afraid that if other people really knew how we felt, we would be rejected or abandoned. And this is old patterning that has to do with people pleasing behavior and also self abandonment. Because as children, those were the very parts of us that were not quote unquote acceptable, either within our family or our society, or they're parts of us that we learned that we couldn't show to the world because those were not the parts that helped us get our needs met or garnered us what we perceive to be love. But as children, we are very adaptable and we quickly learn the things that get us praise and attention and the things that get us judgment and criticism. And so as adults, now we have this part of us who regulates this internally. And that starts usually with our inner voice, the inner critic that keeps us in this box, in this specific facade that we have created for ourselves. And so when we have a big emotional reaction or an activation that occurs, it really is an opportunity to recognize this is a part that has been pushed into the shadows, that is ready to come up and finally be seen, felt, and healed. The subconscious mind is the 95%, and the conscious is the 5%. And so a lot of the stories and patternings that we all program, if you will, that we're running on is actually below our conscious awareness. And our ego does a really good job of keeping us in alignment with the identity that we currently hold. And many of our limiting beliefs are what shapes that identity. And yet, many of us don't really recognize what those patterns are because consciously we may believe one thing, but subconsciously we are still running on those old limiting beliefs and paradigms and stories that are keeping us stuck and keeping us small. That's why when we have these activations, we have to look at them as opportunities to see things that were previously below the surface. And if we're able to create enough space, because that's really the challenge for most of us, is that when we get emotionally activated, it almost feels automatic. We immediately assign a meaning or a story. And immediately then, because our beliefs elicit our emotions that create actions or non-actions, and then that reinforces the original loop. And so it seems like we have no agency here because we haven't really cultivated the ability to pause and become more responsive versus reactive. But this is a skill set that we can learn. And the more we get to know ourselves and the more inner inquiry that we do, the easier it becomes to start identifying these patterns as they arise and allowing ourselves to take a breath and choose differently. So many people struggle with core limiting beliefs. A lot of these revolve around feeling unlovable, feeling unworthy, feeling like we're broken, feeling like we're bad, feeling like we're too much, all of these type of stories. Now, it can be really anything because all of us have our own set of programming running. But when we break it down and we really dig deep, the stories that are running are stories that do not empower us. They are stories that, in fact, were given to us, if you will, or downloaded within us from our parents, our teachers, or other significant adults in our childhood. Or it could even be other peers from our childhood. The messages we were sent about our body, about our worth, about how smart we were, about how capable we were or not capable we were. Those are all things embedded in the programming. And the subconscious mind is a loyal assistant, or you could call it a loyal servant. It will run and keep you in alignment with those beliefs and that identity until you start to learn how to reprogram those beliefs and create a new, more elevated or empowered identity. What becomes challenging about this is that we're always drawn to what feels familiar because in our nervous system, that is what is deemed as safe. Even if the thoughts and beliefs and stories that we're telling are actually painful for us and hold us back, because the subconscious mind is neutral. And so, one of the practices that is so important is to start really asking yourself when you have these emotional activations or triggers, is to immediately ask, what is the story I'm telling about this event? What is the meaning that I'm giving to the events in my life? And from there, we can start to see these patterns playing out over and over. One of the stories that I have found repeatedly showing up in my life is related to worth, where in childhood, I never felt good enough. I always felt like I was deficient in some way. And so when things happen in my life, a lot of times the story I will assign is that I'm not enough, or that I need to be doing more, or that I need to be better, or try harder, or work harder. And that has really held me back in my life until I started seeing this repeating pattern over and over again. And so whenever I get emotionally reactive, especially around issues related to my worth, I really take a deep breath and step back. And I ask myself that very question: what's the story? What meaning am I giving? And then I will even go deeper to ask questions like, if it was true that I was not enough, what would that mean about me? And then I will go down that rabbit hole of, well, it would mean that I need to be better or do more, or that I need to be more. And then again, I would ask, and if that was true, what would that mean about me? And then I will go dig even deeper. And you'll just keep uncovering these layers until you get to the very core of what's driving this emotional reactivity. The other practice here, because this is a lot of mental energy when we're looking at stories and patterns and things, and that is a very important piece. But the secondary piece is actually the emotional piece, where we have to be able to allow ourselves to really sit in these very difficult emotions. So when you get triggered, there is an emotion that is coming up, and it honestly, it floods us most of the time. And that's how we get really activated. All of a sudden, it's just like whoosh, and that emotion is right there. And instead of do everything in our power not to feel that emotion, we have to practice the skill set of really being with difficult emotions. Because the true skill set in healing and growth is getting comfortable with discomfort. Because anytime you're feeling that discomfort, that means that you are bumping against an upper edge or an edge of your identity or your ego. And so, in order to break beyond that or to move beyond that, we actually do have to feel that discomfort or be able to sit in that discomfort in order to move through it. Because the more we do that, then the more familiar and comfortable these other feeling states become. And honestly, when we're able to really allow an emotion to come in, whether that's anger or sadness or even shame, which is one of the lowest vibrational energies, if we can just allow it to be there and not try and fix it or change it, it will, in fact, eventually dissipate. Now, we can't go into this practice with an agenda of wanting it to go away, because then the ego is just coming in the back door. This is really an embodiment practice of learning to really feel our feelings. And so many people talk about or use the phrase, you must feel it to heal it. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is that we have to be able to allow ourselves to begin feeling all these emotions that we have been so desperately trying to avoid. And so it is a practice that we have to start small and we have to titrate into. You can be sure that if there's a strong emotional reaction or if you're feeling triggered, there is an emotion there that needs to be witnessed. We breathe, we use somatic tools if we must to help us be with those difficult emotions. And this is a work that most of us avoid because it feels like a lot of times those emotions will consume us, or that if we open the doorway that we'll never be able to bring ourselves back into a state of regulation. But in fact, repressing these emotions or keeping them pushed down is actually what's creating a lot of the upheaval in our lives, because it's not actually the feeling that is the problem. It's the resistance to feeling those feelings. Our feelings are our compass. They help guide us, because how we're feeling can be a very clear indication of what we're thinking or the beliefs that we're holding, which is the very programming that we're wanting to upgrade and install new, more empowered programming. And so when we can be aware of our feeling states, that gives us another doorway then to recognize that there's an old wound or an old programming or an old story that we need to take a look at and start reaffirming a new story or a new belief, one that feels more in alignment with a higher version of ourselves, or actually just the truth of who we really are. If this has been helpful for you, please check out my next video that's going to talk about creating a new self-concept that can help pull us forward and quantum leap us on our journey of growth and healing. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for doing this work. Take care.